Have you ever wondered what it would be like to leave everything behind for a life of luxury? For Emily, it seemed like a dream come true, until she realized the price she'd have to pay. This is the story of how she left the man she loved for a billionaire, and regretted it instantly. Welcome to the channel. If you love dramatic stories about love, betrayal, and second chances, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single story. Now let's dive into today's tale. Emily sat cross-legged on the worn-out couch in their tiny apartment, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The room was cozy but cluttered. Jake's art supplies were scattered everywhere, and the walls were adorned with his colorful paintings. It was a humble space, but it was theirs. Or at least, it used to feel like theirs. The apartment was small, with just enough room for a couch, a coffee table, and a TV that barely worked. The kitchen was cramped, and the bathroom was always cold, no matter how high they turned up the heat. But it was home. Or at least, it had been. Emily sighed as she glanced around the room. The walls were covered in Jake's artwork, vivid landscapes, abstract designs, and portraits of people he'd met on the streets. Each piece told a story, and Emily used to love hearing Jake explain the inspiration behind them. But lately, the paintings felt like a reminder of everything she didn't have. Jake emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He had flour on his cheek, a remnant of his attempt to bake cookies earlier. Emily couldn't help but smile at the sight. He was always so... Jake. Messy, kind, and endlessly optimistic. "What do you think?" he asked, holding up a canvas. It was a painting of the two of them, standing on a beach at sunset. The colors were vibrant, the details meticulous. Emily could feel the love he'd poured into every brushstroke. "It's beautiful," she said softly, though her mind was elsewhere. She'd been scrolling through Instagram earlier, and the images of lavish vacations and designer outfits had left her feeling restless. Jake sat down beside her, his eyes shining with excitement. "One day, Em, I'll sell my art, and we'll travel the world together. Paris, Bali, wherever you want to go. Just you and me." Emily forced a smile. Yeah, that sounds nice. But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. Jake had been saying the same thing for years, and while she admired his passion, she couldn't ignore the growing ache in her chest. She wanted more. She wanted the life she saw on her phone screen, the glamour, the luxury, the freedom. Emily had always dreamed of a life filled with adventure and excitement. Growing up in a small town, she'd spent hours flipping through magazines, imagining herself in the pages. She wanted to travel the world, wear designer clothes, and live in a penthouse overlooking the city. But life had other plans. After college, she moved to the city with big dreams, only to find herself working a dead-end job at a call center. That's where she met Jake. He was different from anyone she'd ever known, creative, free-spirited, and unapologetically himself. At first, she'd been drawn to his passion. He saw the world in a way she never could, finding beauty in the smallest details. But as the years went by, Emily began to feel like she was stuck in a rut. While Jake was content to live in the moment, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing out on something more. Jake had always been an artist. From the moment he could hold a pencil, he'd been drawing, painting, and creating. His parents had encouraged his talent, but they'd also warned him that art wouldn't pay the bills. But Jake didn't care. He believed in his work, and he was determined to make a name for himself. He spent his days working odd jobs to make ends meet and his nights painting in their tiny apartment. Emily admired his dedication, but she couldn't help feeling frustrated. While Jake was chasing his dreams, she was stuck in a job she hated, barely making enough to cover rent. She loved him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were going nowhere. Lately, Emily had been spending more and more time on social media. She'd scroll through Instagram for hours, staring at photos of influencers living the life she'd always dreamed of. They traveled to exotic locations, wore designer clothes, and dined at the finest restaurants. Every time she closed the app, She felt a pang of envy. Why couldn't that be her life? Why was she stuck in this tiny apartment watching Jake paint while she worked a job she hated? Her friends didn't help. They'd tell her to aim higher and find someone who could give her the life she deserved. At first, Emily had brushed off their comments, but lately, she'd started to wonder if they were right. The tension between Emily and Jake had been building for months. It started with small things: Emily complaining about the mess in the apartment, Jake forgetting to pay the bills. But lately, it had escalated into full-blown arguments. "Why can't you just get a real job?" Emily had snapped one night after Jake spent their last $50 on art supplies. "This is a real job," Jake had shot back. "I'm an artist, Emily. This is who I am." The fight had ended with Jake storming out of the apartment and Emily crying herself to sleep. They'd made up the next day, but the tension lingered, a constant reminder of the growing divide between them. Emily had heard about Daniel Hart long before she met him. He was a billionaire entrepreneur who'd made his fortune in tech. He was handsome, charismatic, and always in the news. She'd seen his photos on Instagram, him standing in front of private jets, attending glamorous parties, and posing with celebrities. He was everything Jake wasn't, and Emily couldn't help feeling drawn to him. When she found out he was moving to the city, she'd been intrigued. She never expected to meet him, but fate had other plans. The art gallery was buzzing with energy. Jake's paintings were the centerpiece of the exhibit, and Emily couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride as she watched him talk animatedly with a group of admirers. His passion was infectious, and for a moment she forgot about the restlessness that had been gnawing at her. But then the room seemed to shift. A hush fell over the crowd as the doors swung open, and in walked Daniel Hart. He was taller in person, his presence commanding attention. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he exuded confidence and power. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. Jake, oblivious to the change in the room, continued talking about his art, but Emily's eyes were locked on Daniel as he made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. When his gaze landed on her, he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made her heart race. "You must be Emily," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "Jake's told me so much about you." Emily blinked, surprised. "He has?" Daniel chuckled. "Of course, he's very proud of you." Jake finally noticed Daniel and waved him over. "Daniel, I'm so glad you could make it. This is my girlfriend, Emily." "We've just met," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving Emily's. "Your work is impressive, Jake, but I must say the real masterpiece is standing right here." Emily felt her cheeks flush. Jake laughed, clearly missing the undertone in Daniel's words. "Thanks, man. That means a lot coming from you." As Jake launched into an explanation of his latest painting, Daniel leaned closer to Emily. "You have an eye for beauty," he said softly. "I'd love to show you my collection sometime." Emily's heart pounded. She glanced at Jake, who was still engrossed in his conversation with another guest, and then back at Daniel. I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel smiled, satisfied. "I'll be in touch." As he walked away, Emily felt a mix of excitement and guilt. She knew she shouldn't be flirting with another man, especially not in front of Jake. But Daniel was offering her something she'd always dreamed of, a life of luxury, excitement, and endless possibilities. That night, as she lay in bed next to Jake, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. She replayed their conversation in her mind, imagining what it would be like to live in his world. But every time she looked at Jake, sleeping peacefully beside her, a pang of guilt shot through her. The art gallery was a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and energy. Jake's paintings were the centerpiece of the exhibit, and Emily couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride as she watched him talk animatedly with a group of admirers. His passion was infectious, and for a moment, she forgot about the restlessness that had been gnawing at her. The gallery was packed with people, art enthusiasts, critics, and curious onlookers. The walls were adorned with Jake's work, each piece telling a story. There was a painting of a bustling city street, another of a serene countryside, and a striking portrait of Emily herself. She remembered the day Jake had painted it, how he'd insisted on capturing every detail of her face, from the curve of her smile to the sparkle in her eyes. "This is your night, Jake," she said, squeezing his hand. "You deserve this." Jake grinned, his eyes shining with excitement. "I couldn't have done it without you, Em. You've always believed in me." Emily forced a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd been scrolling through Instagram earlier, and the images of lavish vacations and designer outfits had left her feeling restless. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing out on something more. But then the room seemed to shift. A hush fell over the crowd as the doors swung open and in walked Daniel Hart. He was taller in person, his presence commanding attention. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he exuded confidence and power. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. Daniel was everything Jake wasn't. Polished, sophisticated, and dripping with wealth. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp, and his eyes a piercing shade of blue. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries like he owned the place. Jake, oblivious to the change in the room, continued talking about his art. But Emily's eyes were locked on Daniel as he made his way toward them. When his gaze landed on her, he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made her heart race. "You must be Emily," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "Jake's told me so much about you." Emily blinked, surprised. "He has?" Daniel chuckled. "Of course, he's very proud of you." Jake finally noticed Daniel and waved him over. "Daniel, I'm so glad you could make it. This is my girlfriend, Emily." "We've just met," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving Emily's. "Your work is impressive, Jake, but I must say the real masterpiece is standing right here." Emily felt her cheeks flush. Jake laughed, clearly missing the undertone in Daniel's words. "Thanks, man. That means a lot coming from you." As Jake launched into an explanation of his latest painting, Daniel leaned closer to Emily. "You have an eye for beauty," he said softly. "I'd love to show you my collection sometime." Emily's heart pounded. She glanced at Jake, who was still engrossed in his conversation with another guest, and then back at Daniel. I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel smiled, satisfied. "I'll be in touch." As he walked away, Emily felt a mix of excitement and guilt. She knew she shouldn't be flirting with another man, especially not in front of Jake. But Daniel was offering her something she'd always dreamed of, a life of luxury, excitement, and endless possibilities. A week had passed since the art gallery, and Emily couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. His words echoed in her mind. "I'd love to show you my collection sometime." She'd replayed their conversation over and over, imagining what it would be like to step into his world. But she hadn't heard from him. Part of her was relieved. She loved Jake, and the guilt of even considering Daniel's offer was eating her alive. But another part of her was disappointed. What if she'd missed her chance? Then one evening, as she was scrolling through Instagram, a notification popped up. It was a direct message from Daniel. "Daniel Hart, I didn't forget about you. Are you free this weekend? I'd love to show you my collection." Emily's heart raced. She glanced at Jake, who was busy painting in the corner of the room. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't even notice her staring at him. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. Should she reply? What would Jake think? Before she could second-guess herself, she typed back, "I'd love to." Daniel's response came almost instantly. "Perfect. I'll send a car for you on Saturday at 7 p.m. Dress to impress." Emily's stomach fluttered with excitement. She'd never been to a billionaire's mansion before. What would it be like? Would it be as glamorous as she imagined? But as she looked at Jake, a pang of guilt shot through her. She loved him, didn't she? How could she even consider meeting another man behind his back? Saturday arrived. and Emily spent the entire day in a state of nervous excitement. She tried to act normal around Jake, but her mind was elsewhere. "You okay, Em?" Jake asked as they ate breakfast together. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Jake nodded, but she could tell he didn't believe her. Still, he didn't press the issue. He was too busy preparing for another art show. As the day went on, Emily's guilt grew. She thought about canceling, but the thought of stepping into Daniel's world was too tempting. At 7 p.m. sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside their apartment. Emily's heart pounded as she stepped outside, dressed in her best outfit, a little black dress and heels she'd saved up for months to buy. The driver opened the door for her, and she slid into the back seat, her hands trembling. The car was luxurious, with leather seats and a glass partition separating her from the driver. As they drove through the city, Emily's mind raced. What was she doing? Was she really about to betray Jake like this? But then the car pulled up to a massive mansion, and all her doubts vanished. The house was breathtaking, with towering columns, a grand staircase, and a fountain in the front yard. Daniel was waiting for her at the door, dressed in a tailored suit and holding a glass of champagne. He smiled as she approached, his eyes lighting up. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "You look stunning." Emily blushed, feeling both flattered and nervous. "Thank you. Your home is incredible." Daniel chuckled. "Wait until you see the inside." He led her through the grand foyer, past a chandelier that sparkled like diamonds, and into a spacious living room. The walls were adorned with priceless artwork, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. "This is just the beginning," Daniel said, handing her a glass of champagne. "I want to show you everything." Over the next hour, Daniel gave Emily a tour of his mansion. He showed her the indoor pool, the home theater, and the wine cellar stocked with bottles that cost more than her monthly rent. Everywhere they went, Emily felt like she was in a dream. She'd never seen such luxury before, and it was intoxicating. But as the night went on, her guilt began to creep back in. She thought about Jake, sitting alone in their tiny apartment, and wondered what he would think if he could see her now. As they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. "Emily," he said, his voice low, "I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know that this could be your life too. All you have to do is say yes." Emily's heart raced. "What are you saying?" Daniel stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm saying that I want you in my life. You're different from anyone I've ever met. You're beautiful, intelligent, and full of potential. Don't you want more than what you have now?" Emily's mind was spinning. She thought about Jake, about their life together, and about the dreams she'd given up on. I don't know," she whispered. Daniel smiled, sensing her hesitation. "You don't have to decide tonight. Just think about it." The car dropped Emily off at her apartment just before midnight. She stepped inside, her mind still reeling from everything she'd seen. Jake was asleep on the couch, a paintbrush still in his hand. Emily's heart ached as she looked at him. She loved him, didn't she? But as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's offer. What would it be like to live in his world, to have everything she'd ever wanted? The days following Emily's visit to Daniel's mansion were a blur. She tried to act normal around Jake, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she looked at him, she felt a pang of guilt. She loved him, didn't she? How could she even consider leaving him for someone else? But the thought of stepping into Daniel's world was too tempting. She couldn't stop thinking about the mansion, the art collection, and the life of luxury he'd offered her. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Jake turned to her, his expression concerned. "Emily," he said softly, "is everything okay? You've been acting different lately." Emily's heart sank. She knew she couldn't keep hiding her feelings. "Jake," she began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." Jake's face fell. "What's wrong?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future." Jake nodded, his eyes filled with worry. "Okay, what about it?" Emily hesitated, unsure of how to say what she needed to say. "I love you, Jake, I really do, but I don't know if this is enough for me anymore." Jake's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "What do you mean?" Emily looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "I want more, Jake. I want a life of adventure, of luxury. I want to travel the world, wear designer clothes, and live in a beautiful home. And I don't think we can give each other that." Jake was silent for a moment, processing her words. Then he shook his head, his voice filled with disbelief. "Emily, we've talked about this. I'm working hard to make my art successful. We'll have all those things one day. I promise." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "But what if that day never comes, Jake? What if we're stuck in this tiny apartment forever, barely making ends meet? I can't live like that." Jake reached out to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Emily, please. We're a team. We can get through this together." Emily shook her head, her tears spilling over. "I'm sorry, Jake, I can't do this anymore." The next few hours were a blur. Jake begged her to stay, to give them another chance, but Emily's mind was made up. She packed her bags, her hands trembling as she folded her clothes and placed them in her suitcase. Jake watched her from the doorway, his eyes filled with pain. "Emily, please, don't do this." Emily couldn't look at him. She knew if she did, she might change her mind. "I'm sorry, Jake, I have to go." As she walked out the door, her suitcase in hand, she felt a mix of relief and guilt. She was finally free to pursue the life she'd always dreamed of. But at what cost? Emily's new life with Daniel was everything she'd ever dreamed of, and nothing like she'd imagined. The mansion was even more breathtaking than she remembered. Every room was a masterpiece, filled with priceless art, luxurious furniture, and the latest technology. The staff catered to her every need, from preparing gourmet meals to keeping the house spotless. At first, Emily was in awe. She spent her days exploring the mansion, lounging by the pool, and shopping for designer clothes. Daniel spoiled her with gifts, jewelry, handbags, and even a brand new car. But as the days turned into weeks, Emily began to feel a growing sense of unease. Daniel was often busy with work, leaving Emily alone for hours at a time. When he was home, he was distant, more interested in his phone or his business meetings than in spending time with her. "Daniel," she said one evening as they sat in the dining room, eating a meal prepared by the chef. "Can we talk?" Daniel looked up from his phone, his expression distracted. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Emily hesitated, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. I feel like we don't spend much time together anymore. You're always working and I'm always alone." Daniel sighed, setting his phone down. "Emily, you knew what you were getting into. My work is important. It's what allows us to live this lifestyle." Emily nodded, but his words didn't make her feel any better. She missed the connection she'd had with Jake, the way they could talk for hours about anything and everything. As the weeks went on, Emily's loneliness grew. She tried to fill her days with shopping and spa treatments, but it wasn't enough. She missed having someone to share her life with, someone who truly cared about her. One afternoon, as she sat by the pool, scrolling through Instagram, she came across a photo of Jake. He was at an art show, surrounded by admirers, a big smile on his face. Emily's heart ached as she looked at the photo. She missed him more than she cared to admit. That evening, Emily decided to confront Daniel. She found him in his office, typing away on his laptop. "Daniel," she said, her voice firm, "we need to talk." Daniel looked up, his expression annoyed. "Can it wait?" "I'm in the middle of something important." Emily shook her head. "No, it can't wait." I'm not happy, Daniel. I feel like I'm just here, like I don't matter to you. Daniel sighed, closing his laptop. Emily, you knew what this would be like. I'm a busy man. I can't drop everything to entertain you. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking you to care about me, to spend time with me, to make me feel like I'm more than just another possession. Daniel's expression softened, and he stood up, walking over to her. Emily, you're not just another possession. You're important to me, but you have to understand that my work comes first. Emily shook her head, stepping back. I can't live like this, Daniel. I thought this was what I wanted, but it's not enough. The next few days were tense. Daniel tried to make an effort, taking Emily out to dinner and buying her more gifts, but it wasn't enough. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made a mistake. One night, as she lay in bed alone, she thought about Jake. She missed his laughter, his warmth, and the way he made her feel seen. She realized that no amount of money or luxury could replace the love they'd shared. The tension between Emily and Daniel had been building for weeks, and it finally came to a head one stormy evening. Emily had spent the day alone, wandering the mansion like a ghost. She'd tried to distract herself with shopping and spa treatments, but nothing could fill the void she felt. She missed Jake, his laughter, his warmth, the way he made her feel seen. That evening, Daniel returned home late, as usual. He walked into the living room, where Emily was sitting by the fireplace staring into the flames. Emily, he said, his voice cold. We need to talk. Emily looked up, surprised by his tone. What's wrong? Daniel crossed his arms, his expression stern. I've been hearing rumors. People are saying you've been seen with another man. Emily's heart sank. She'd met up with Jake a few days ago, but it had been innocent. They'd just talked, nothing more. Daniel, it's not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Then what is it, Emily? Are you unhappy? Do you regret leaving him? Emily hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to hurt Daniel, but she couldn't keep hiding her feelings. I don't know, she whispered. Daniel's expression darkened. You don't know. After everything I've done for you, you don't know. Emily stood up, her emotions boiling over. Daniel, you've given me everything I've ever wanted except for you. You're always working, always distant. I feel like I'm just here, like I don't matter to you. Daniel's face flushed with anger. You think I don't care about you? I've given you a life most people can only dream of. What more do you want? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I want you, Daniel. I want us to be a team, to share our lives together. But I can't do that if you're never here. Daniel shook his head, his voice cold. Emily, you knew what you were getting into. My work is important. It's what allows us to live this lifestyle. Emily's heart ached at his words. She realized then that Daniel would never change. He was too focused on his work, too consumed by his ambition. I can't live like this, Daniel, she said, her voice breaking. I thought this was what I wanted, but it's not enough. The argument ended with Daniel storming out of the room, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. She sat by the fireplace, tears streaming down her face as the storm raged outside. She thought about Jake, about the life they'd shared and the love they'd lost. She realized then that she'd made a mistake. No amount of money or luxury could replace the connection she'd had with Jake. The days following the argument with Daniel were a blur. Emily spent most of her time alone, wandering the mansion like a ghost. She tried to distract herself with shopping and spa treatments, but nothing could fill the void she felt. She missed Jake, his laughter, his warmth, the way he made her feel seen. She thought about the life they'd shared, the dreams they'd had, and the love they'd lost. One evening, As she sat by the pool, scrolling through Instagram, she came across a photo of Jake. He was at an art show, surrounded by admirers, a big smile on his face. Emily's heart ached as she looked at the photo. She missed him more than she cared to admit. Emily spent the next few days reflecting on her choices. She thought about the day she'd left Jake, the look of pain in his eyes as she walked out the door. She thought about the life she'd built with Daniel, the luxury and the emptiness that came with it. She realized then that she'd made a mistake. No amount of money or luxury could replace the connection she'd had with Jake. One evening, as she sat in the living room, staring into the fireplace, Emily made a decision. She couldn't keep living like this. She had to go back to Jake, to apologize, and to try to make things right. She packed her bags, her hands trembling as she folded her clothes and placed them in her suitcase. She left a note for Daniel, explaining her decision, and walked out the door. The car ride to Jake's apartment felt like an eternity. Emily's heart raced as she thought about what she would say, how she would explain her actions. When she arrived, she took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Jake opened it, his expression a mix of surprise and confusion. "Emily," he said, his voice soft. "What are you doing here?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I made a mistake. I thought I wanted a life of luxury, but all I really wanted was you." Jake hesitated, his eyes searching hers for sincerity. Finally, he reached out and took her hand. "I missed you," he said softly. Emily's tears flowed freely now. "I missed you too. More than I can ever say." The car ride to Jake's apartment felt like an eternity. Emily's heart raced as she clutched the steering wheel, her mind swirling with thoughts of what she would say, how she would explain her actions. The city lights blurred past her window, but all she could see was Jake's face, his kind eyes, his warm smile, the pain she'd caused him. She parked the car outside his building and sat there for a moment, staring at the familiar entrance. The last time she'd been here, she'd walked out with a suitcase in hand, leaving behind the life they'd built together. Now she was back, hoping for a second chance. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped out of the car and walked up to the door. Her hand trembled as she knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. Jake opened the door, his expression a mix of surprise and confusion. He looked tired, his hair disheveled, and his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but guarded. "What are you doing here?" Emily's heart ached at the sight of him. She'd forgotten how much she'd missed his face, the way his eyes lit up when he smiled. But now, there was no smile, just a wary look that made her feel even more guilty. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. "Can I come in?" Jake hesitated, then stepped aside, letting her into the apartment. It was exactly as she remembered. Cozy but cluttered, with Jake's art supplies scattered everywhere and his paintings covering the walls. The familiarity of it all made her chest tighten. She turned to face him, her hands clasped in front of her. "Jake, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. I thought I wanted a life of luxury, but all I really wanted was you." Jake's expression softened, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there, waiting for her to continue. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I was selfish, and I was wrong. I thought I could have everything I ever wanted, but I didn't realize what I was giving up. I didn't realize how much you meant to me until it was too late." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, her voice breaking with emotion. "I missed you, Jake, more than I can ever say. And if you'll give me another chance, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Jake was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers for sincerity. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Emily, I don't know if I can trust you again," he said, his voice filled with pain. "You left me for him. How do I know you won't do it again?" Emily's heart sank at his words. She knew she didn't deserve his forgiveness, but she had to try. "I was selfish, and I was wrong. I thought I wanted a life of luxury, but all I really wanted was you. I just didn't see it until it was too late." Jake looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of hurt and hope. "Emily, I loved you. I still do. But you broke my heart. How do I know you won't do it again?" Emily stepped closer, her tears falling freely now. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, Jake, but I can promise that I'll never stop trying to be the person you deserve. I'll never stop loving you." Jake hesitated, then reached out and took her hand. "I missed you," he said softly. Emily's tears flowed freely now. "I missed you too, more than I can ever say." As they stood there, holding hands and talking through the pain, Emily realized that true happiness wasn't about money or status. It was about love, trust, and being with someone who truly cared for her. The days following Emily's return to Jake were filled with tension and uncertainty. They spent hours talking, trying to rebuild the trust that had been broken. It wasn't easy. Emily's betrayal had left a deep wound, and Jake wasn't sure if he could ever fully forgive her. But they were both determined to try. Emily did everything she could to show Jake that she was serious about making things right. She helped him with his art, cooked his favorite meals, and spent hours listening to him talk about his dreams and aspirations. Jake, in turn, tried to be patient and understanding. He knew that Emily was genuinely remorseful, but the pain of her betrayal was still fresh in his mind. Rebuilding their relationship wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and frustration, times when Jake's anger and hurt would bubble to the surface. "How do I know you won't leave me again?" he asked one evening, his voice filled with pain. Emily took his hand, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, Jake, but I can promise that I'll never stop trying to be the person you deserve. I'll never stop loving you." Jake's expression softened, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. "I love you too, Emily, but we have to take this one day at a time." As the weeks turned into months, Emily and Jake slowly began to rebuild their relationship. They learned to communicate better, to be honest about their feelings, and to support each other through the ups and downs of life. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Jake turned to Emily, his expression serious. "Emily," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future." Emily's heart raced. "What about it?" Jake took a deep breath. "I want to start over. I want to build a life together, one that's based on trust and love. But we have to be honest with each other. No more secrets, no more lies." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I want that too, Jake, more than anything." Jake smiled, his eyes shining with hope. "Then let's do it. Let's start over." Months had passed since Emily returned to Jake, and their relationship had slowly but surely begun to heal. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt and lingering pain. But they were committed to each other and to building a stronger, healthier future together. One evening, as they sat on the couch in their cozy apartment, Jake turned to Emily with a smile. "I have something to show you," he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Emily raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" Jake stood up and took her hand, leading her to the small studio he'd set up in the corner of the apartment. On the easel was a new painting, a vibrant, breathtaking depiction of the two of them, standing on a beach at sunset. The colors were rich and warm, and the love between them was palpable in every brushstroke. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the painting. "Jake, it's beautiful." Jake smiled, his voice soft. "It's us, Emily. This is our future. Together." Emily turned to him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I don't deserve you, Jake, but I'm so grateful you've given me a second chance." Jake reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. "We've both made mistakes, Emily, but what matters is that we're here now, and we're choosing each other every day." Emily nodded, her voice trembling. "I choose you, Jake, today, tomorrow, and always." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Emily realized that true happiness wasn't about money or status. It was about love, trust, and being with someone who truly cared for her. She thought about the life she'd left behind, the mansion, the luxury, the emptiness, and knew she'd made the right choice. Jake wasn't perfect, but he was real. He was her home. As the sun set outside their apartment, casting a warm golden glow over the room, Emily looked at Jake and smiled. "Do you think we can really do this?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. Jake smiled back, his eyes filled with love. "We already are, Emily. One day at a time." And so Emily and Jake began a new chapter of their lives, one built on honesty, trust, and a love that had weathered the storm. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. Because in the end, they'd learned that the greatest luxury of all was the love they shared. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey of love, betrayal, and second chances. We hope Emily and Jake's story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of forgiveness, the importance of trust, and the beauty of choosing love, even when it's hard. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales like this one. Your support means the world to us, and we're so grateful to have you as part of our community. Until next time, remember, true happiness isn't about what you have, it's about who you have by your side. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.